Okay. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Bonjour, tout le monde. I hope you are doing well. Welcome in this 5th day of training. Thank you for being here. So today and on Monday, we'll look at another set of methods about trade misinvoicing. Today it's going to be the partner country method specifically, and we'll start with a session and presentation from Bojan on this partner country method. It's going to take around 1 hour. Then we'll have a break at 10 CET for 30 minutes until 10:30. Then at 10:30, we'll start a case study presented by Kathy Nicolaou, who is here as well, and who is a regional expert on IFF and also working with UNECA. And we'll have a short break before going into an example of the partner country method with Yuchen, who's working with Kathy. So we should finish at around latest 1:30 CET. I'm posting in the chat the links. I hope you can see them. Yeah, the links to the webpage of the event where you can find the PowerPoint presentations. During the example and the case study, we'll have documents to share with you. So either they will already be online on the webpage, so we will let you know, or we will post them in the chat because you will need to download them and use them for the exercise. So we will give you a bit more detail about that at the end of the first session before the break. So for now, I will give the floor to you, Bojan, to start this first session. Thank you.
Thank you, Amandine, and good morning again to everyone. It is so nice to be here on Friday morning, and thank you for sticking with us throughout this week and throughout these sessions. So today, as Amandine said, we will be looking. Just a sec. Voilà. So today we will be looking into the methods on the trade misinvoicing in the tax and commercial illicit financial flows category. So trade misinvoicing has been identified in many studies as being one of the main types or channels for flows of illicit financial flows. To that end, we have included two of the methods in the guidelines. So the one we'll be looking into today, the partner country method, and the other one for Monday, price filter method. So those are the methods that have been applied in various cases using, to some degree, different data sources, and also being differently administered or processed in terms of getting to the results. In some of the studies, it has been shown that both methods, so partner country method and price filter method, even though they would be addressing or trying to measure the same type of tax and commercial illicit financial flows, they do produce different results, which can be anticipated to a certain level of degree, as, for example, partner country method may in its purest form have a higher probability of taking other factors into account, so other than the illicit financial flows.
What the fuck?
On the other hand, the price filter method is only focusing on a part of misinvoicing, so only on the mispricing. So it has a narrower scope for that matters. So it is important that to as much as possible, maybe we can apply both of the methods and then try and compare the results. But also what has been actually shown or even suggested is that the partner country method can be used as a first step, as a first method to somehow get a better picture of what essentially is going on. So try to identify some of the categories, flows, commodities, or specific partners, which may be more susceptible to the illicit financial flows. And then use the price filter method, which is a more detailed method to go into those specific areas and produce more accurate or more reliable estimates. Okay, so those are the two methods that we said we will be covering. So today we're looking at the partner country method. Now, there is a side note that I have to make here. Both of the methods have a little plus next to them, which is trying to indicate that certain adjustments or enhancements are proposed in their application as we move along. You may remember that for a statistical measurement, some additional aspects will have to be covered or included. Therefore, when we refer to the partner country method, we essentially not mean the partner country method that has been applied already in various researches, but to go to the most detailed or detailedly processed partner country method, therefore partner country method plus. So on the conceptual side, the partner country method is a top-down method, meaning that we start at the aggregate level analysis, and we're not looking at a particular unit's view. So we're not using microdata per se in this method. However, we do want to, even though we start at the aggregated level, and sometimes we also stay at that level, we still have to dig deeper in terms of the reasons for any potential asymmetries reported or obtained using this method. So the method is essentially building on the mirroring of trade statistics by partner countries. So essentially, it is looking what exports of country A to country B are and how those compare to declared imports of country B from country A. And then we are cross-checking those two records and observe whether there are any discrepancies in between. The major assumption behind the partner country method is that one of the partners' values are correct. So this means that, for example, country A's records of exports may not be correct, but country B's imports are correctly valued, and therefore any difference in country A's exports to country B's imports would be treated as misinvoicing or similar. So this is a very critical assumption, which is also highly unlikely in the real world, so to say. So that's why serious doubts have been raised about reliability of this method. And we will try and address some of those doubts to make this method, let's say, more applicable or reliable in terms of statistical measurement. Maybe a side note here, a few studies that have been done using partner country method have somehow, at least implicitly, implied that trade records of developed economies are more accurate than the ones of developing economies. So hence there was a lot of research that was titled, illicit financial flows from developing economies, and they were comparing developing to developed economies and so on. Now, of course, this has turned out to be not the case. We know that illicit financial flows, first of all, they cross borders, which means that many countries are involved. In today's globalized world, super connected world, of course, illicit financial flows are flowing everywhere. Essentially, every country in the world is susceptible to illicit financial flows. And it is not only the developing economies or the developed economies, it is essentially all. And again, we can remember that the SDG indicator 1641 on illicit financial flows requires both inward and outward illicit financial flows. So if there are outward financial flows from developing economies, then there must be inward financial flows into developed economies, and vice versa, and also within the groups themselves. Of course, both flows, inward and outward, are important because they bring about various consequences to our societies, to our economies. So therefore, it is important to observe both flows, inward and outward flows. You may remember in the last days, some of the methods were only able to capture one type of flow. Usually those would be the outward IFFs. However, in the trade misinvoicing, we can essentially be looking at both inward and outward, and this is a extremely strong case for the application of such a method. Now, when we said that the assumption is to have that one value is correct, the other one is incorrect, we also need to know that this method is, of course, inheriting many limitations pertaining to a simple fact that many factors, not only illicit financial flows, contribute to trade asymmetries that are being observed in those bilateral data. So the most, or the three main or well-known factors for asymmetries in those bilateral trades would be, number one, application of criteria or different criteria for partner country attribution, referring to the imports, exports, but then also the categories of re-imports or re-exports. So those will be very important to see how they have to be applied in order to avoid any discrepancies caused in bilateral trade statistics. The second very well known and also research reason for asymmetries is the difference between CIF and FIBO valuation. So the CIF, so cost insurance freight, so this is usually the how the import statistics are reported on, whereas on the other hand, FIBO, free on board or freight on board, is usually how the export statistics are reported. And of course, they would have different valuations. So in order to, when we just simply observe exports reported and imports reported, normally we would have a difference that will be reflecting the CIF and FIBO differences. This may not be always the case, but we have to check if it is. And if it is, we have to, of course, account for those. And the third very important element, or as a major factor of trade asymmetries, is the application of different trade systems. So we have the general or the special trade system, and in the special trade systems, there are, of course, many options. So we need to observe which trade systems are being used in partner countries before we can make any moves ahead. Now, of course, those exports of one country and the imports of other countries may not coincide, also due to other reasons like the time lags, or we have the misclassifications or goods passing, as we mentioned, through third countries or customs. There could be lack of information or misspecification. There could be statistical measurement errors and so on. So there are multiple factors that are essentially contributing, and we should be accounting for them as much as possible. So even with those major drawbacks of the method, of course, the method is not redundant, is not useless. Rather, let's try and find out ways how to overcome those limitations, to bring them on board and essentially say, okay, we have a difference, we have a discrepancy in bilateral trade statistics. So now let's try and understand what are the reasons behind it and take out all the reasons which can be explained by various reasons for that, as we've seen before. So the valuation, the trade systems, the time lags, and so on. And what we're left with, we cannot explain. So we can reasonably well consider this part as illicit financial flows. Now, most of the applications of the method, of the partner country method, have been done using globally accessible data on bilateral trade flows, such as the UNCTAD or IMF DOTS databases. And of course, this is a perfectly well-suited solution or data source to observe what is going on at the aggregated and international levels. However, it may be missing, or it is missing, a lot of detailed information that are required for this method to be truly reliable. National statistical authorities, and we believe in particular the customs authorities, have more detailed data. And more of all, they have also relevant expertise and knowledge that needs to be brought into the game, again, as with other methods, in all stages of the application of the method. So first, to see which data to use, whether they make sense, so validating our inputs into the calculation phase or into this method, but then also interpreting results and providing guidance in what essentially results would mean, would they make sense, validating them, and so on. So in the guidelines, we do propose that the partner country method can be used, but somewhat enhanced to address those limitations. So therefore, we have this PCM plus noted. So the first proposal is to compare national data with trading partners or with major trading partners. So we believe that, when we actually have national data, so nationally available data, they could be more detailed and they would actually be more suitable, and they would more accurately lay out the picture of our country's exports or imports, and vice versa, carrying out mirror exercises with our partners or major trading partners, we can essentially observe and identify those discrepancies at the more granular level and using more accurate data. Of course, in an ideal scenario, we would be comparing our national data bilaterally with all the countries. This may not in practice be fully available. So we may focus on our major trading partners and say like the top 5 or top 10, or let's say accounting for 75% of our trade, and we can try and see. Now, this of course may work or may be more easily obtained if we are a big trading partner for all the other countries. If on the other hand, we're a small economy, and of course, we only play a tiny portion in all of our major trading partners, there may be some delays, if not reluctancy, of our major trading partners to report back to us or review bilateral trade statistics. Nevertheless, as much as possible, using nationally available data is a suggestion to be going with. So this we touch upon the second point, which is to use granular national data. So including most detailed levels of the production classification by partner and all potentially available microdata, by which we could reduce any uncertainties about the source of those bilateral trade asymmetries. So we mentioned earlier, so statistics usually held by customs authorities or anybody else within a national statistical system, and applying our method on those data would be improving the accuracy of our estimates. Again, it may not be fully viable to access and process all the data, so we may focus on only prominent flows or products or trading partners. So we have to be somewhat flexible and practical in the application of those suggestions. The third one, of course, addresses the CIF-FOB differences. We have to resolve them. So in some cases, so we mentioned exports, apologies. So exports are reported on a FOB valuation, whereas imports usually on a CIF valuation. Now, more and more countries are also reporting imports on FOB valuation. So we, of course, have to make sure if it is already FOB, then we just simply compare imports and exports, and they should be the same numbers. But in some cases, of course, this does not happen. So in those cases, we have to apply certain ratios, so the CIF-FOB ratios, to correct for those asymmetries that are caused by those differences in valuation. Whenever possible, and in a lot of cases, actually, it is possible, it is advisable to apply specific ratios for regions or even countries or commodities. So those would be more tailored to specific flows and may reflect better the differences in the valuation. In the global research that was done, so let's say a few years ago, it was a standard, I believe, to use a 10% CIF-FOB margin. Then in the last GFI report, I think they used a 6% valuation. But then there were also other studies by the World Customs Organization and some other researchers saying that we could be using different regional ones. I think there was a case in the WCO study about the US trade, and essentially trade with Europe, so US to Europe, the CIF margin was 2.2%. For the South America, it was nearly 5%. And all other partners in the world, it was less than 3%. There was also a case study by the US, checking the trade between the US, China, and Hong Kong, and they realized that the eastbound and the westbound trade have different values of the CIF-FOB ratio. So it's not only the regional one, sometimes it is also the direction of the trade that might be causing any differences in the applications. Moreover, and specifically for commodities, it is actually true that different commodities may have different CIF-FOB margins, so the percentage of their value. For high value goods such as I don't know, gold, it is actually shown that the CIF percentage or the CIF ratio in the value is much lower than for other goods. For some fresh goods or agricultural products, the transport costs are also usually higher than for other manufactured goods. So all of those things have to be taken into account when we are addressing the CIF-FOB differences. So the next one is addressing, it's very easy to write it down or read it. It says analyze remaining bilateral asymmetries, as if this was so simple. Of course, it is not. So there are many other reasons that we might be looking into and trying to account for when we look at the bilateral trade asymmetries. So we will be taking a look later on. There is a nice tool or a table that would guide us somehow in how or which asymmetries we could be using in order to address those differences. So this case or this table has been prepared by United Nations Statistics Division, and we will be focusing on relying on those tools, so to speak, or those guidance. The next point is applying reliability weighting procedure. In some cases where gaps in mirror trade statistics are very high or very substantial, these may raise some doubts about whether those are really a result of a trade asymmetry or of illicit financial flows, or maybe they are a result of an error or something. There could be an additional zero typed in the data or something. So to somehow account for this, to address that doubts that those larger gaps may not be essentially as a result of misinvoicing, the weighting procedure is applied to reduce the weight or the importance of those large asymmetries in our data when we are calculating it. We will be looking into this procedure afterwards, and it has been applied in a few cases by WCO, but also by ECLAC. So it is essentially, I believe it does offer some good grounds for the application. Now, the last point is, going away from a purely quantitative or statistical approach. It uses the qualitative approach. So it says that we should be validating our results using expertise, national customs and trade experts, but also international ones. Consult with them and try and get the sense whether the results are okay, whether there should be any adjustments or corrections for a particular flow or for a particular commodity. So this, I think, is very important to somehow validate the results and to increase the accuracy or reliability of the partner country method application. So in order to apply partner country method, we require bilateral trade statistics. So between reporting country, which is our country, and our trading partners. So ideally, all of the trading partners, in a more limited way, only major trading partners. In some cases, when it is not possible to obtain any other data, we could also use the rest of the world category, so exports and imports to the rest of the world. However, as mentioned earlier, whenever we use nationally available and collected data, this would not be the case. We would always know who our trading partners are. So it is important that we have the analysis done at the level of trading partners as well. So the trade data that we would be looking at are, of course, the values and the volumes and the quantities of imports and exports. So the type of flows are imports and exports, but also we should be having data on the flows of imports and exports. We also need to get as much as possible data on the CIF and the FIBO valuation, on all our trading partners, countries of origins and destinations, and similar. So ideally, we said those data would be collected nationally, usually by the customs authorities, but this may differ from country to country, where they would be collected, stored, and how they could be accessed and shared. And in an ideal scenario for a statistical measurement and the application of this method, we should be looking at the granular level data. So we would say at least 6 digits of the HS classification, and ideally we could also be adding some lower levels if those could be attained in our international trade. There are some international sources which could complement or supplement our national sources. So for the bilateral trade statistics, we have the UNCTAD and the AMF dots, so direction of trade statistics. So those are very valuable additional sources. And then we also have UNCTAD's global transport cost database. Those could be useful to be addressing the CIF FIBO valuation. And similarly, the OECD's ITIC, International Transport and Insurance Cost database, I believe. So those two databases would be very valuable in addressing the CIF and FIBO valuations. So once we have the data collected, and you may remember, for those of you who were there yesterday, we have actually observed that a lot of the work is essentially in getting the data and cleaning the data and preparing the data for the application itself. So once we are past that phase, once we have the data prepared, we can move on to the calculation phase. So we are essentially following a procedure in several steps and slowly addressing one asymmetry reason after another. This flow chart here, prepared by the UNSD, so United Nations Statistics Division, is essentially leading us in that work. So first of all, when you observe the trade asymmetry, then check what are the differences in the trade systems, or whether there are differences in trade systems. Then check and address differences in valuation, so the CIF-FOB. Then check the partner country attributions, so make sure that you are addressing the questions of re-exports, consignments, sometimes also merchanting, and so on. And then check for other asymmetries, timing, under coverage, misclassification, and so on. And when you account for all of this, then you're left with the unexplained discrepancy, which could be attributed by assumption in this method and all the processes to illicit financial flows, so trade misinvoicing. It would be actually useful to start by assessing the published asymmetries, starting at the very aggregated level. You could start with total exports and imports, and then slowly move to selected commodity groups and observing also what is going on with the major trading partners. And when you identify that there are some differences or discrepancies, you can go and dig deeper to a more detailed level in this first preliminary analysis. And even though you can do that, it is, of course, ideally you would be checking all the flows, all the partners, all the commodities with all the nationally available data. And in the cases where you can identify that there are obvious problems with the symmetries and validate the results, then the next step ideally would be to use price filter method. So the one method we will be looking into on Monday, and applies this method to those specific cases to provide even more detailed analysis and results. So first we have to check what is going on with the trade system. So we know that sometimes the trade system, so the differences in the trade systems between countries may cause or may lead to trade asymmetries, but those asymmetries cannot be attributed to the illicit financial flows. So when we analyze the trade system, of course, first we have to identify or know what a statistical territory of a country is. So a statistical territory of a country is a territory with respect to which trade data are being compiled. So we have, our mainland, let's say, or our country, but then sometimes we might have islands, territorial waters, we could have industrial free zones, we could have enclaves, and so on. When statistical territory is the same as economic territory, then we say we have a general trade system. So this is the case here in the slide. Sorry. So this is the case here in the slide. So we have an economic territory, this square that includes the free circulation area, industrial free zones, premises for inward processing, commercial free zones, and custom warehouses. So all of this is economic territory, and all of this is also a statistical territory. So everything, and when I say everything, I mean by all, the goods, also services if possible, entering or leaving any of those are treated as imports and exports. So if anything comes from outside our economic territory into either free circulation area or custom warehouses or commercial free zones and so on is treated as imports. And anything that is leaving those 5 areas within an economic territory to the rest of the world is considered as exports. Now, what happens if statistical territory is not the same as economic territory? So in this case, we have a special trade system. So we can see, for example, that only industrial free zones, premises for inward processing, and free circulation area are included in a statistical a statistical territory, which means that everything that is entering those 3 areas from anywhere else, either rest of the world, but also from commercial free zones and custom warehouses, is treated as imports. Anything that is leaving those areas is treated as exports by our country, that is. Now, if another country is exporting to our country and those exports go to the commercial free zone, they would be assigning this to their exports to our country, whereas we would be assigning this not as imports to our country, but imports to the commercial free zone. Only when this goods enter would be